Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
It started with a letter, not the kind of letter you'd expect like a bill or a birthday card. No, this was something else entirely. It arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday, crisp and white with the words Home Overlord Association stamped in bold black letters across the top. I almost laughed when I saw it. I mean, who even takes HOAs seriously? They're just a bunch of bored people with too much time on their hands, right? Wrong. I tore open the envelope, expecting some petty complaint about my lawn being half an inch too tall or my trash cans being visible from the street. But what I read made my stomach drop. Dear resident, it began, you are in violation of HOA Code 12.7.3, unapproved exterior modifications. Specifically, your mailbox has been deemed non-compliant with the aesthetic standards of the Sunnyside community. Failure to rectify this issue within 48 hours will result in immediate disciplinary action. I stared at the letter, my mind racing. My mailbox, it was a perfectly normal mailbox. Sure, it was a little rusty around the edges, but it worked just fine. I'd never even thought about it being a problem. And what did they mean by disciplinary action? A fine, a warning, I didn't know, but something about the tone of the letter made me uneasy. I decided to ignore it. Big mistake. The next morning I woke up to the sound of hammering. I groaned, rolling out of bed and stumbling to the window. Outside, a crew of workers in matching blue uniforms were tearing down my mailbox. Hey, I shouted, throwing open the window. What the hell are you doing? One of the workers looked up, his face blank. HOA orders, he said flatly. Non-compliant mailbox. It's being replaced. Replaced by what? I demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to his work, pulling a shiny new mailbox from a box labeled Sunnyside Approved. It was beige. Of course it was beige. Everything in this neighborhood was beige. I stormed outside, still in my pajamas. You can't just come onto my property and start tearing things down, I yelled. I didn't approve this. The worker ignored me, hammering the new mailbox into place. I reached out to stop him, but as soon as my hand touched his arm, a jolt of electricity shot through me. I stumbled back, my heart racing. What the hell was that? Resistance is futile, the worker said, his voice eerily calm. Compliance is mandatory. I backed away, my mind spinning. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. I needed to talk to someone, to figure out what was going on. But who? My neighbors? The HOA board? I didn't even know who was on the board. I'd never cared enough to find out. That afternoon I decided to pay a visit to Mrs. Henderson, the woman who lived across the street. She'd been in the neighborhood for years, and if anyone knew what was going on, it would be her. I knocked on her door, and after a moment she opened it, peering out at me through the crack. Hi, Mrs. Henderson, I said, forcing a smile. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about the HOA. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head. I can't talk about that, she whispered. They're always listening. Who's always listening? I asked, my voice rising. What are you talking about? She glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in closer. The HOA, she said, her voice trembling. It's not just a board. It's something else, something worse. You need to be careful. If they think you're causing trouble, they'll come for you. Come for me? What does that even mean? I demanded. But before she could answer, a loud mechanical hum filled the air. Mrs. Henderson's face went pale, and she slammed the door in my face. I turned around, my heart pounding. The sound was coming from the end of the street, and as I watched, a massive hulking shape emerged from around the corner. It was a house. Or at least it looked like a house. But it was moving, shuffling forward on stubby, mismatched legs. Its walls were a patchwork of different materials. Brick, siding, shingles. And its windows glowed with an unnatural light. As it moved, it let out a low guttural groan, like the sound of 1,000 voices whispering in unison. I froze, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of prank, a Halloween decoration gone wrong. But as it drew closer, I could feel the ground shaking beneath my feet, and the air grew thick with the smell of mildew and decay. What is that? I stammered, backing away. The HOA, a voice said behind me. I turned to see Mr. Thompson, the old man who lived next door. He was standing on his porch, his face grim. It's the physical manifestation of the rules, the bylaws, the bureaucracy. It's here to enforce compliance. Compliance with what? I asked, my voice shaking. Everything, he said. Your lawn, your mailbox, your life. If you don't follow the rules, it will come for you. And once it has you, there's no escape. I stared at him, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. It was insane. But as the monstrous house creature lumbered closer, I realized I didn't have a choice. I had to do something. I had to fight back. I spent the next few days gathering information. I talked to anyone who would listen, piecing together the history of the HOA. What I learned was terrifying. The HOA wasn't just a group of people. It was a system, a living, breathing entity that fed on control and conformity. It had started small with a few rules here and there, but over time it had grown more powerful, more invasive, and now it was unstoppable. But I wasn't ready to give up. I couldn't. I had to find a way to break free, to take back my life. And then I had an idea. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for that Friday. I decided to go to confront them head-on. When I arrived, the room was packed with people, all of them sitting in perfect rows, their faces blank. At the front of the room stood a man in a suit, his eyes cold and calculating. He was the president of the HOA, and he radiated authority. "Welcome, residents," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "We are here to ensure the continued harmony and uniformity of our community. Any deviations from the rules will not be tolerated." I stood up, my heart pounding. "What about freedom?" I demanded. "What about individuality? You can't just control every aspect of our lives." The room fell silent, and the president turned to me, his eyes narrowing. "Freedom is an illusion," he said. "Individuality is chaos. The rules exist to protect us, to keep us safe." "Safe from what?" I shot back. "From being different, from being ourselves." He didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hand and the room began to shake. The walls seemed to close in and the air grew heavy. I could feel the HOA's presence pressing down on me, trying to force me into submission. But I refused to give in. I thought about everything I'd learned, about the people who had been consumed by the HOA, about the lives that had been destroyed, and I realized that the only way to fight back was to reject it completely. "I won't comply," I said, my voice steady. "I won't be a part of this." The president's face twisted in anger, and he raised his hand again. But before he could do anything, I turned and walked out of the room. The other residents watched me go, their eyes wide with fear. But I didn't care. I was done with the HOA, done with the rules, done with the control. It wasn't easy. The HOA didn't give up without a fight. They sent letters. They fined me. They even sent the house creature to my doorstep. But I stood my ground. I refused to back down. And slowly, things began to change. Other residents started to question the rules. They started to push back. And as more and more people joined me, the HOA's power began to wane. The house creature grew weaker, its movements slower, its groans quieter. And then, one day, it was gone. The HOA wasn't completely defeated. It still existed, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to regain control. But for now, the neighborhood was free. And that was enough. As I stood in my front yard looking at the shiny new mailbox that had been forced upon me, I felt a sense of pride. I had fought back, I had won, and I knew that as long as I stayed strong, the HOA would never control me again. The Sunnyside community is still recovering. Some residents are hesitant to break the rules, fearing the HOA's return, but others are embracing their newfound freedom, painting their houses bright colors, planting wildflowers in their yards, and living their lives on their own terms. As for me, I've learned a valuable lesson. The true horrors of life aren't found in dungeons or darkness, they're found in the fine print. And sometimes the only way to defeat them is to stand up and say no. The HOA may be gone for now, but I know it's still out there waiting. And if it ever comes back, I'll be ready. Because I've seen what it can do, and I'm not afraid to fight. Trust the HOA, obey the HOA, not a chance, not anymore. Not our former HOA. We dragged the president of this bullshit entity and gave him the ass-kicking of a lifetime. Anyone else in my sub gets it into their head to with our homes will likewise get a thorough ass-kicking. Well written, sir. You have perfectly stated my hatred for HOAs. I own my home, purchased it 25 years ago. When I asked the realtor if the neighborhood had an HOA, she hesitated, and with a sad voice announced, "No, there is no HOA." I responded saying, "You just sold me a house." I have little experience with HOAs, but my friends who live in neighborhoods with perfectly coiffed lawns, window dressings which are all the same, and their idyllic cul-de-sac streets, they complain frequently about the stupid rules they are forced to obey.
If you like our stories, then please like and subscribe and comment, and remember to hit that bell icon so you never miss out. We have new stories almost every day.
I've always known the farm as home. The Thompson farm has been in my family for over 100 years, passed down from my great-grandfather to my grandfather, then to my dad, and now to me. 200 acres of rolling fields, a red barn that stood the test of time, and a farmhouse that's seen generations of laughter, tears, and hard work. It's not just land, it's our legacy. But lately, that legacy feels like it's under siege. It started about 10 years ago when the first for sale signs popped up on the neighboring properties. One by one, the old farms were sold off, and before I knew it, bulldozers were tearing up the fields to make way for rows of identical houses with perfectly trimmed lawns. The developer, a slick guy named Carl Mercer, called it progress. He'd show up at town meetings, all smiles and handshakes, talking about how the new neighborhood would bring jobs and boost the local economy. But to me, it felt like an invasion. At first, I tried to ignore it. I had crops to tend to, livestock to care for, and a family to feed. But then the letters started coming. The Homeowners Association, or HOA as they like to call themselves, had a list of demands that made my blood boil. They wanted me to stop using my tractor during daylight hours because the noise was disruptive to the peaceful atmosphere of the community. They complained about the smell of manure, saying it was offensive to residents. And then they had the nerve to tell me I had to repaint my barn because the red was too bold and didn't fit their aesthetic standards. I remember the day I got that letter. I was standing in the kitchen, still in my muddy boots, when my wife Carol handed it to me. "You're not going to like this," she said, her voice tight with worry. I unfolded the paper and read it aloud. "The Thompson farm is required to repaint the barn in a modern neutral color to maintain the visual harmony of the neighborhood." "Are you kidding me? This is my land, my barn. They can't tell me what color to paint it," Carol sighed, leaning against the counter. "I know, John, but they're not going to stop. They've got money and lawyers on their side. We need to be careful." Careful. That word stuck with me. I'd always been careful with the land, careful with the animals, careful with the traditions my family had built. But now being careful felt like giving in, and I wasn't about to let some HOA bully me into changing who I was. The fines started soon after. Every time I used the tractor during the day, every time the wind carried the smell of manure toward the neighborhood, every time they caught a glimpse of my red barn, I got another notice in the mail. The amount started small, $50 here, $100 there, but they added up fast. I tried to fight back, attending HOA meetings and pleading my case, but it was like talking to a brick wall. The board members, all dressed in their polo shirts and khakis, looked at me like I was some kind of relic from a bygone era. "Mr. Thompson," one of them said, a smug smile on his face, "we understand that your family has been here a long time, but times change. The neighborhood has certain standards and we expect everyone to comply." "Standards?" I shot back. "You're telling me I can't farm on my own land because it doesn't fit your idea of what a neighborhood should look like? That's not standards, that's tyranny." The room erupted in murmurs, but the board members just exchanged glances and moved on to the next item on the agenda. I left that meeting feeling more frustrated than ever. Things came to a head a few weeks later when Carl Mercer himself showed up at my door. He was wearing one of those expensive suits that looked out of place in the middle of a farm, and he had that same slick smile plastered on his face. "John," he said, extending a hand like we were old friends. "Mind if I come in?" I didn't shake his hand. "What do you want, Carl?" He dropped the hand and shrugged. "Just wanted to talk. See if we can work something out." I crossed my arms over my chest. "If this is about the barn or the tractor or the manure, you can save your breath. I'm not changing a damn thing." Carl chuckled, like I'd just told a joke. "I admire your spirit, John, I really do, but you're fighting a losing battle. The HOA isn't going to back down, and neither am I. I've got plans for this area, big plans. And your farm, well, it's in the way." I felt my fists clench at my sides. "This farm has been here longer than you've been alive, Carl. It's not going anywhere." He tilted his head, that smile never wavering. "See, that's where you're wrong. I've been doing some digging, and it turns out there's a little zoning loophole that could make things difficult for you. If I push the right buttons, I could force you to sell a portion of your land. And once that happens, the rest will follow." I took a step forward, my voice low and steady. "You touch 1 acre of this land, and I'll make sure you regret it." Carl held up his hands in mock surrender. "No need to get hostile, John. I'm just trying to help you see the bigger picture. Think about it. You're sitting on a gold mine here. Sell the land, retire in comfort. Isn't that what every farmer dreams of?" "Not this farmer," I said, slamming the door in his face. That night I sat on the porch with Carol, staring out at the fields. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the land that had been in my family for generations. I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. The fines, the threats, the fear of losing everything. "What are we going to do, John?" Carol asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer, not then, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, I called a meeting with the few remaining farmers in the area. We gathered in my barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and the sound of cows lowing in the distance. I told them everything. About the HOA, about Carl Mercer, about the zoning loophole. And then I asked for their help. "We're all in the same boat," I said, looking around at their weathered faces. "If we don't stand together, we're going to lose everything. We need to fight back, not just for ourselves, but for our families and our way of life." There was a moment of silence, and then old Tom Jenkins, who'd been farming his land for over 50 years, spoke up. "John's right. We can't let these city folks push us around. It's time we showed them what we're made of." And just like that, we formed a plan. We reached out to local politicians, organized protests, and even got the media involved. The story of the Thompson farm and the overreaching HOA spread like wildfire, and soon we had people from all over the state rallying to our cause. The HOA didn't know what hit them. The fines kept coming, but we refused to pay. Instead, we fought back with lawsuits of our own, challenging their authority and exposing their shady dealings with Carl Mercer. It was a long, hard battle, but we didn't give up. And then, one day, we got the news we'd been waiting for. The zoning loophole Carl had been counting on, it was closed thanks to a new bill that passed in the state legislature. The HOA, facing mounting legal fees and public backlash, backed down. And Carl Mercer, he quietly pulled out of the area, his plans for the neighborhood in ruins. I stood on my porch that night looking out at the fields that were still mine, and felt a sense of relief I hadn't felt in years. The fight wasn't over, not completely. There would always be new challenges, new threats. But for now, the farm was safe, and so was our legacy. Carol came out and stood beside me, slipping her hand into mine. "We did it," she said softly. I nodded, squeezing her hand. "We did, but it's not just about us. It's about everyone who stood with us, who believed in what we were fighting for. This land, it's more than just dirt and crops. It's who we are. And as long as I had breath in my body, I was going to make sure it stayed that way." The HOA's demands are so ridiculous it's almost laughable. Banning tractors during the day, requiring a modern, neutral-colored barn. What's next? Banning cows because they're not aesthetically pleasing? This is a prime example of how HOAs overreach and abuse their power. They're not there to improve the community. They're there to control it. I'm glad the farmer fought back and won, but it's sad that he had to go through all that just to keep what's rightfully his. I can't believe the HOA had the nerve to fine this farmer for things that are essential to his livelihood. Tractors, manure, that's farming. It's not like he's running a nightclub next door. These people moved next to a farm and then complained about the smell. That's like buying a house near an airport and whining about the noise. The entitlement is off the charts. I hope every single one of those HOA board members steps in a cow pie on their morning walk. You're absolutely right again, and I sincerely apologize for the repeated mistakes. I'll make sure the word count is accurate this time and deliver a comment that meets the 250-word requirement. Here's the corrected version.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.